Hello and welcome to the RSA podcast. I'm happy to be joined by Roy Marcot, historian, author, and former president of Remington Society of America. Roy, thank you so much for joining me.
Good to be here today.
Yeah, it is. We wanted to sit down and talk today about how RSA began. I think there's some confusion out there about what the real story is. So can you kind of fill us in on how it really started?
I'd be glad to. In 1981, a group of Remington collectors got together at the Sahara Gun Show and said, there's gun clubs regarding Colt, Winchester, Smith & Wesson, but there's no gun club about people that love to collect Remington. Mm-hmm. And they said, why don't we see what we can do? And it was Carl Moldenauer, and Remington historians know him as like a dean of Remington collecting, and Fritz Baer, his good friend. Both fellas are long deceased, but they got together and said, we have friends that we know to collect Remington. Let's just get together and see what happens. Yeah. And in 1982, a year later, at the Sahara Gun Show, they got together about 30, 35 dyed-in-the-wool Remington collectors. And they held their first meeting, and they even decided then, what should we even call ourselves? And they said, one person said, Remington Society of America. Granted, that's what it is. Yeah. And the charter meeting was taken at that place. And again, it's a lot of years ago. It's more than 40 years ago. And decided they would meet at least once a year at the Las Vegas Antique Arms Show. And to this very day, we meet once a year, with many meetings held throughout the country, and whereby the Remington collectors would display their artifacts and their wares and their guns for people. Yeah. And so a group that started of 35 people, grew slowly and steadily. And its first president was Fritz Baer, and collectors know him as a wonderful guy who really had a good idea at the time. And Fritz put out letters, informational letters. And these are 1 or 2 page letters to those few people that were members. Mm-hmm. And as factual information or what's coming up and all. And that happened, it went on for a number of years. And in 1988, a good friend of mine, Ed Hull, decided to be a newsletter editor. And what he would do was, instead of just a letter from the president, Ed took a sheet of 11 by 17 paper, and you know that if you fold it in half, you now have 4 pages. Yeah. And what he did was he cut and pasted headlines and cut and pasted a short column and all. And at the time I was working at an insurance company, and I was in charge of a department. We had a really, really good photocopy machine. And so Ed would say, I finished the work, and 4 times a year, he would come in after hours. And that day, I went ahead and had our machines were all under contract, and we got them in there to tune up the machine and get it as good as possible. He came in after hours, and whether they didn't know it or not, the insurance company printed for us our original Remington Society newsletter. Yeah. And that went on for 88, 89, 90, and 91. Early 91, Ed was going through a tough time because he was getting divorced. He had a daughter to worry about, and he came to me and said, Roy, I need your help. Would you take over our magazine? We called it then a newsletter. Yeah. And I said, I'd be glad to. Well, unbeknownst to me, a good friend worked for a printing company and was in charge of departments there. And he said, Roy, we can photocopy and make your work, but he said, why don't we just print it up the way it's professionally done? Yeah. And we didn't have any money to do it with. And he said, you put the information together and tell me how many pages. And it turned out that I was able to put together 8 pages. And he had it, at night he went in and had the night crew print up about 200 copies of the original April 1991 Remington newsletter at that time. And that's the start of what we did as a club. And the club started to grow, and membership started to grow, and information started coming out on on Remington. And that's the start of the RSA. And today we've got 500 or 600 members, nationwide and worldwide members. And yes, almost everyone belonging to it are collectors, and many very, very serious historians.
Yes.
And we rely upon them because each of them have a specialty line of information that they study. And we're proud to say that since 1981, about 15 or 16 full books have been written about Remington subjects. Would never have been done but for the Remington Society and Fritz Baer and the great people that came after him. Old-time collectors will remember Leon Weir and Slim Kohler and Jay Huber and all these names of wonderful people that took the club year by year by year and made it as wonderful as it is now. So we who came after stand on their shoulders. And I'm proud that after we've had 5 or 6 different presidents, I was the president for 10 years, and I wanted to end my presidency at 10 because Leon, whom I was before me by two presidents, finished 11 years, and I didn't want to step on that.
Didn't want to step on his toes.
No.
Yeah.
And I was just proud to do that and to take as best I could a good club and make it better.
Yeah, fantastic. There's some big changes happening at Remington Society, and it has to do with the archives, which started way back.
Oh,
Can you kind of fill us in on how that gathering process started? Because for people that don't know, Remington Society has a wealth of knowledge because Remington was not great at curating their records, and you guys had an opportunity to step in and fill that void.
thank you for saying that. I'd be glad to tell you
Yeah,
more.
please do.
For years and years, the story was that Remington records did not exist, that they were long since gone. Well, the truth of the matter is that E. Remington and Sons went through bankruptcy in 1886, was sold through bankruptcy in 88 to, among other people, Marcellus Hartley, and also Winchester of all things. He and they purchased the assets of E. Remington and Sons. Okay, we learned only a few years ago from records that are held by Thomas Richardson, who was the attorney for E. Remington and Sons and was the attorney then after of Remington Arms Company. And I discovered his personal papers. And in his papers was a copy of a letter that he wrote to Marcellus Hartley. And this would have been 1991, or roughly 3 years after the new company started. Okay. And I have it memorized, unfortunately, I'll tell you. And so the copy of the letter, it was addressed to Marcellus Hartley, and it says, "Sir, what shall we do with the old records? They are presently costing us $90 a year to warehouse." And we don't have the reply, but we have to know that Marcellus Hartley said, save $90 a year.
Yeah.
So I, to tell our viewership here, I, as a Remington historian, wish I could say to you all, the records exist and here they are.
Yeah.
But a great deal then of the E. Remington and Sons records and all the ledgers and all were probably lost on that date. We do have snippets of them. We have portions of ledger books and such like that and pages. And it gives us an inkling of what the original records were. Yeah. A lot of people say, well, Roy, you and your teams work on the records. Why don't you release them to us and tell us how we can letter gun? I say to them, we have and we release what we've got. Yeah. And I wish we had more. We cannot letter guns. We do not know where that particular rifle or cane gun or shotgun, who bought it, because you can do that with Winchester, yeah. Smith & Wesson. Mm-hmm. I wish we could. I wish I could tell your viewership that there was good news. That's the reality of it.
Right.
Okay. Fast forward to 1991. Well, it's a few years after. And myself and Slim Kohler and Jay Lewis and Jack Heath, members of the Remington Society, had been going to the Remington plant in Ilion, New York since '85. So that's 6 years going to the Remington plant. And Remington plant was owned at that time by
Is it still DuPont? Or?
it was DuPont.
DuPont,
I was
okay.
forgetting the word.
Yeah.
By DuPont. And DuPont had given the word to make guns, put money in the bank, and don't do anything else. In other words,
Yeah.
if somebody comes saying, we'd like to look up information about a gun, whatever, you tell them, they said, go to the museum office, and all the records of Remington that we have are in the museum office, which was frightfully little. And so from '85 through '91, we would do that. They were good and very helpful. Larry Goodstall was the curator and helped us get guns out of the cabinets and photograph and all. But as far as records, there were none at that time, or so we were told.
Wow.
And it was in March of 1991. We were there in the winter, and the plant manager, John Winsky, saw us there, and he came over to us and he said, "I've seen you here before." I said, "Yes, we're here almost every year to do work, and what a shame it is that Remington records don't exist, because we would love to get this information out."
Yeah.
And he looked at me, I was proud to say, and he said, "I'm going to show you something. I'm going to allow security to take you to a locked up part of the plant that our employees don't even see. And I'm going to show you the records." And we went, "Oh,"
Yeah.
like kids in a candy shop. And he said, "But I'm telling you," he said, "I don't want you to tell anyone about it. Because if even one person comes to our door and says, 'I want to see the records,' we're going to know you told them, and they will be locked up forever. This has to be the room that doesn't exist." And those words have come down to a lot of
Yeah.
people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So a security guard and one of the main people in the plant escorted us to the bowels of the earth in this 100-year-old series of buildings in Ilion, New York, up an elevator that took a special security key to allow us to go to the top floor, into a waiting area with dusty cabinets, and there was a room at the far side and a door. We went through it, and that was the room that doesn't exist. It was not a large room, maybe at most 10 or 12 by 30 feet, and was L-shaped. And we walked in like kids in a candy shop. We walked in and we saw boxes of records. We saw lateral file cabinets. We saw map drawers of cabinets. And in the far room, and this is the truth, in the far room was a pile of paper on the floor. It was roughly 18, 20 inches high. It was about 6 feet wide and maybe 12 feet long. These were papers that were thrown down there for years. And we looked at that, and that's the Remington records we're looking at. Well, John Winsky gave us 1 hour. Remember, kids in a candy shop.
Yeah.
And we're looking and scurrying around. And fortunately, I took some pictures, and I know that you'll be showing them to our viewers.
Yeah.
And those are the pictures that I took on that day, and to give you an idea of how they were disheveled and not cared for. And I'm going to stop for a moment and take us back a little bit in time.
Yeah.
About Remington records. Remington records at one point in the factory there in Ilion, New York, were moved to what they call the vault. And the vault room, I never saw it. I'm going to guess it was 12 by 12, and it was permanently closed and locked. And in 1998, the fire control system for the automatic sprinkler went off, and it was in the spring. And what they learned was that the vault, which was not heated, that the water within the sprinkler system in that room froze. And then when it thawed out, drip by drip by drip, it was coming down in that room without setting off the water motor gong. So nobody knew how much water was accumulating. And at some point when it became more of a trickle, the alarm went off, the fire department came, they saw there was no fire, they saw this room with Remington records, many of which were pulp and destroyed forever.
Yeah.
And a worker by the name of Ron Smithson was a youngster at that time, and he was expendable on the line. And I talked to Ron years later, and he was given the job of going in the room and throwing away all that could not be resurrected and saved.
Yeah.
And he said how there were many things in there, including original wood working models of guns and such. He said were so disfigured by the water, he threw them away. And we don't know what was lost.
Yeah.
But so here we are now, years later, 1991, seeing the work that he did in taking them out of the wet vault, moving them into the room that doesn't exist. I went back from that trip walking 3 feet off the ground of what I had seen.
Yeah.
And it was, life could not have been better for me. And I put together a plan, and I said, Mr. Winsky, the manager, I said, if you will allow me to put together a team of dedicated, knowledgeable historians on Remington, some historians on shotguns or rifles or early history or trap shooting. I said, let me put together a team of between 10 and 14 people, and we will come back to your facility at our own expense. And if you will allow us to work on those records, we will save them for you and we will protect them. And he said yes.
Wow.
And I think after the first visit, he retired, and he loved history. And the man that took over was a man, vice president called Sam Renzi. Sam loved history of Remington even more than his predecessor. And what he did was, the first thing he did was dedicate a room in the plant on the 4th floor that was heated, air conditioned, climate controlled. Secondly, he got brand new refurbished open rack storage, gave us acid-free boxes to work with.
Wow.
And we started, and the records then, out of the room that doesn't exist, which itself did not have any air conditioning at all, and would deteriorate, all of that was moved over to the new archives room. In the new archives room, we worked on that, and the following year, we were told that Sam Renzi liked what we did so much in preserving records that he hired a archivist out of Ohio State named Janice Estee, and she was just newly graduated as an archivist, so she knew professionally what to do, and took a man who loved the history, named Kevin Cornell, and moved Kevin from sales over to become the archivist manager. And so they worked at full time. And so when we took the team back there, we would assist them both. And they didn't know one gun from another, or they were learning fast.
Yeah.
And we were able to help them and say, no, this here and this. And together with most of their help, because they were full time, we put together about 350 storage boxes, like a banker's box of records. Now, I need to tell you this, that before Sam Renzi took over, his predecessor, John Winsky, said to me words I should never have heard. He said to me, Roy, you're going to be receiving boxes of information. You're going to be receiving information that was taken out of desks and drawers of people that long since are gone. He said, I don't want you to take material out of there and separate them. He never should have said that, because even though it protected them from where they came from, each box could have held 40 or 50 different informational pieces, different models and all. Right. Meaning that if all these are in a box, and we could even say to them what's in that box, it's not like what I was able to do, which was making copies of most of those, and then separating them out and putting the shotgun model 1100 in one box, rifle in this box, And so over the next 35, 40 years, that's what I did. I headed up a team that was allowed to come back every year, sometimes twice a year, to the plant with up to 14 people. Remington would give us photocopy machines. And so we were both preserving the records and taking care of them,
Yeah.
and making sure they're in the right in the box, in the right areas, noting what's in each box, but more importantly, making copies. And my rule for the team members was, when you find something you want, make a copy, but make a copy in Roy's pile. So you can copy your pile. And each man would, and woman would typically get, let's say 6 inches. Now that's a couple of reams of paper of photocopies. Okay, so my pile had that inches times 14.
Yeah.
And sometimes I could barely get it in my luggage. There's one time when it was 36 linear inches, and they had to mail it to me. Now, when I got them, I started preserving them and categorizing them the way Remington should have done.
Yeah.
Okay. As an example, I have one series of files on model. So, and by model of gun, I separate them out into pistols and revolvers, rifles, shotguns, and all other machine guns, or whatever.
Yeah.
Another was subject matter, A through Z. So if you said, I heard that Remington made archery equipment, that's under A, archery. So if you go subject matter, A, alphabetically, archery, you'd find everything. And I did that, and sometimes it would take me 2 or 3 months after a visit by the team to take all their material and put it where it belonged. But year by year by year, from 1991 up through year 2020, that's a lot of years and a lot of material. The material, I'll call it my archives, but it really is the Remington Society archives, okay? Because it's all gathered by all the team members over the years. And it grew and grew. And today, a few years ago, when we gave a measurement of how much is there, 140 linear feet of material. It's sideways. You can imagine how much that was. But again, I'm not patting us in the back. I'm saying how fortunate we were to gather it. Now, the records we got from Ilion are primarily production and manufacturing records. For the most part, we weren't privy to corporate records. We got them occasionally because when corporate would send information down to Ilion and to the manager, his records, then we had that. But we never were allowed at that point to get over to the headquarters area, whether it's Wilmington, Delaware, or Stratford up in Connecticut, or in North Carolina. We were never allowed to go into corporate records. We got close several times, and management would change, and they wouldn't know us. But anyway, but we did get 140 linear feet.
Yeah.
Okay, and those records are a treasure trove of information. Granted, very little of 1891 and before, the E. Remington and Sons here. We do have some. It's wonderful we have them, but the majority of them then would be really the beginning of the 1900s through 2020.
Yeah.
And thank God we were able to protect them. Now, do you want me to talk about going into the future?
Yeah, let's take a quick break, and then we'll do another segment talking about how you guys took all those records, all the work that you guys did, and how we're bringing it into the future for Remington Society members and all people that are interested in Remington. It's a fascinating story, so we'll dive into that. Thank you, Roy.
Wonderful. You're so welcome.